You know that kind of morning that starts off a bit crooked? The sun was shining too brightly. The coffee got cold before I could sit down, and the neighbor in front decided to mow the lawn for the 1,000th time, just to show that he's organized. It was in this scenario that hell on earth began, all because of a bench. A wooden bench. A bench that I built myself with my calloused hands, and a YouTube tutorial, so that I could drink coffee in my backyard in peace. But peace doesn't exist when that woman decides to show up. She appears like a plague on a freshly cut lawn. You don't even have to look. Her presence is already in the air. It's like bad Wi-Fi. You know it's there, but it doesn't work for anything. On that particular morning, I was sitting on the brand new bench, mug in hand, enjoying the birdsong, and trying to remember why the hell I decided to move into a condo with an HOA. That's when I heard the dry knock on the fence. That knock that prepares you for the absurd. I turned around, and there she was, with her usual clipboard, which, in my theory, serves no purpose other than to feed the inflated ego of someone who thinks they were born to boss others around. "Good morning, sir. I need to talk to you about an unauthorized alteration to your property." That was it, without even feigning politeness. The woman got straight to the point, as if I'd built a clandestine airstrip in her backyard. I stared at her with the look of someone who hasn't woken up to this kind of theater. "Alteration?" I asked, already knowing where this was going. She pointed a crooked finger at the bench, as if it were an architectural offense against world peace. "That bench there, it doesn't meet the aesthetic standards set by the association. We need you to remove it or submit a request for a formal change, subject to approval." I swear to all that is holy that at that moment my soul left my body, did 3 pirouettes in the air, and shouted, "That's it! He's finally snapped!" Because, you see, it was a bank, made of wood, rustic, simple, made from the remains of an old deck. No glitter, nothing exaggerated, just a bench, so I could sit on my butt in peace and listen to the birds, while life kicked me slowly. And what about her? She stood there looking at me as if I'd spray-painted a neon Mona Lisa on the wall of the house. She turned her back without waiting for an answer, handed me a notice folded in 3 with a stapler, because of course these creatures use staplers, even to close envelopes, and marched off with that gait of someone who thinks they're parading in a courtroom. I opened the paper with a mixture of hatred, curiosity, and the desire to use it as toilet paper. And there it was, a fine of $75, with the possibility of an increase if the irregularity is not remedied within 7 days. There was even a paragraph about interference with the visual harmony of the community. Visual harmony of the community? My brother has a bright pink house 2 blocks down. The neighbor next door still has a garden gnome with a cigar in his mouth. And the woman wants to talk about harmony because of one bank? Of course, that was just the beginning. That same afternoon, I tried to understand where this madness was coming from. I picked up the association's bylaws, that little book that seems to have been written by someone who hates happiness, and started leafing through it. And then I realized there was nothing about wooden benches, nothing, not a single line, not one item hidden in font 8, absolutely nothing, which leads me to believe that she simply made up the rule. She made it up on the spot. A law exclusively for my ass sitting in the seat. And that's when the red alert went off. Because if she invented it, who's to say that other fees and fines weren't based on the same theatrics? The following week, I decided to remove the seat, but not for fear of a fine. I wanted to provoke. In its place, I put a peeling beach chair with an old parasol and some styrofoam. I set up the whole fairground scene just to see if she'd show up again. It did. "Sir, that chair," she began, but I stood up with my cell phone in my hand. "You're already filming. Can you do it again?" She froze. She looked at me with that look of a dog that's knocked over a plant and pretends it wasn't him. And without saying another word, she turned around. But the story didn't stop there. 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Not a letter from the HOA, a letter from the registry office. Official notification that there was a property reassessment being filed with the county, a process initiated by the association to redefine the boundaries of the common areas. I read and reread it. It was all very strange. I pulled out my old document file, the one that every adult keeps for fear of a bureaucratic apocalypse, and pulled out the deed to my house, the maps of the lot, and everything else I was entitled to. Faço uma descrição curta como de costume para essa ideia. And then came the punch in the gut. What the HOA was trying to do was redefine the subdivision map, absorbing part of my backyard as common area. Like, as if they wanted to annex the piece where the bank was to the association's land. When the paperwork started piling up on my kitchen table, along with useless HOA pamphlets, an overdue electricity bill, and a half-opened packet of cookies, I realized I was about to dive into a bottomless pit. A hole called, "The Neighborhood Association thinks it's in charge of everything, but doesn't know who it's dealing with." The thing is, that brazen attempt to steal a piece of my yard, disguised as a review of territorial limits, ignited a spark that I didn't even know still existed. A spark that was sleeping underneath my frustration with honking horns, taxes, pointless Zoom meetings, and sloppy people wanting to shit on other people's lives. The first thing I did was spend an entire night reading every single fucking clause of the association's regulations. Word for word, item by item. A Bible of the devil bound in recycled paper and smelling of institutional mold. I found out that a lot of it was vague, like landscaping must be in keeping with the visual aesthetics of the community. What is visual aesthetics? Who decides that? The woman who thinks painting a gate pearly white is civil rebellion. But the real gold was in another piece of paperwork, the land deed. When I bought the house, the realtor mentioned something about the plot being special because it was on the border of the original complex. At the time, I thought it was a salesman trying to increase the value of his offer. But now, rereading it with a keen eye, I've noticed something. My property was part of a plot registered before the association was officially founded. In other words, technically, my land was not under the direct authority of the HOA, unless I had signed something. And guess what? I never signed the damn thing. The problem was that the HOA's headquarters was on a green area next to my house. It was a bizarre building, more like an abandoned doll's house, with community flags and fake potted plants in front. I've always found that building a bit strange, a bit out of place. And out of curiosity, and a little bit of accumulated anger, I decided to pull up the land registry too, because if they were going to try to annex part of my backyard, I might as well check that their headquarters were as legitimate as they claimed. And that's when everything turned into a fourth-rate Mexican soap opera. The lot number of the headquarters didn't exist in the most recent records. I scoured the old county maps, and there it was. That piece of land was part of a subdivision that was split off from my original property decades ago, at a time when the city council seemed to have been run by a drunken chimpanzee. The headquarters plot never had a separate official deed. What's more, it was mistakenly listed within the area that was transferred to me at the closing of the contract. The HOA headquarters was built on top of my land. The building, the furniture, the damn cucumber-flavored water fountain, it was all mine. Only nobody, not even them, knew about it. The association acted as if it had come out of its mother's belly, with a deed in its hand, and a divine right to boss everyone around. Meanwhile, I was having coffee sitting on a bench I'd built out of scraps of wood, and being threatened with a fine as if I'd invaded the Vatican. The next day, I went to the registry office with all the paperwork under my arm, looking like a retired lawyer who had come back from the grave to solve one last case. The clerk took her time, went through the files, made a few calls, and, with the expression of someone who has seen a flying cockroach land on their forehead, confirmed, "Sir, this property here is indeed listed in your registry as part of the original plot." The feeling was a mixture of euphoria and despair. like winning the lottery, but knowing you'll have to face the final boss of a difficult game before receiving the prize. I came home almost levitating. I passed my bench, the one of discord, and sat down with the most debauched smile in the neighborhood. It all made sense now. The woman was trying to push the limits of the HOA because, deep down, she already suspected that something was wrong with the grounds of the headquarters. Maybe someone had commented on it, or maybe she was just greedy, the kind who thinks she can play it smart because no one will check. And she was almost right. No one had checked. Until now. Later that afternoon, I knocked on the door of the association's headquarters. She answered it herself. The look on her face when she saw me holding a pile of papers was quite spectacular. If it had a soundtrack, it would have been like those dramatic soap opera songs when the family secret finally comes out. "I need to talk to you. I thought you should know that you've been sitting on my land for at least 4 years, I said, handing over the copies. She took the papers, read over them, then looked at me with that half-smiled expression of someone who doesn't know whether to call the police or the therapist. She didn't say anything, and frankly, I didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any argument. I returned home and, for the first time in months, managed to finish my coffee without being interrupted by knocks on the fence or stupid fines. But I knew she wasn't going to take it quietly. She was going to fight back, and I was ready. The next morning, the calm seemed suspicious. No new ticket on the door, no theatrical knock on the fence, no shadow of that woman peering down the sidewalk like someone hunting for invisible infractions. Her silence was noisy. It was the kind of silence you hear when a bomb is about to explode. A silence that left the air heavier than bad news in a family WhatsApp group. And I, who already had a complete dossier of records, plans, and old maps of the city, knew that this was just the interval between rounds. The fight would continue. It was only a matter of time. In the meantime, I began to do what any vindictive person with time on their hands would do: dig deeper. And when I say digging, I'm not talking about picking up a shovel and digging up the yard, although, at the time, even that seemed feasible. I'm talking about digging through the city's public archives, the online records of HOA meetings, the financial statements that the association was obliged to publish once a year, those documents that nobody ever reads because they're boring enough to put a bull into a coma. That's when I found the icing on the cake. For the past 3 years, the HOA had been charging a headquarters maintenance fee directly embedded in the monthly dues of all residents. The charge was described as structural expenses of the community center. The detail is that, as it turned out, that community center, or HOA headquarters, as they preferred to call it, was on property that legally belonged to me. In other words, the association was using my land to raise money and justify extra fees for all the neighbors. They were profiting from my backyard without paying a penny in rent. The woman turned my plot into a bill printing machine. I went to the town hall, asked for a certified copy of the up-to-date plan of the subdivision with the property records attached. The employee looked at the system with the same look I get when I'm trying to understand my cell phone bill. After a few clicks, she looked up and said with the naturalness of someone talking about the weather, "Yes, it says here that this area, including the building used by the HOA, is part of your lot. It was an automatic incorporation at the time of the community's expansion, but as far as I can see, there was no regularization with the new owner. This was never corrected. It was never corrected." That sentence rang in my head for the rest of the day, because it meant that, technically, I could have that place fenced off with barbed wire, put a pit bull on the door, and call it a personal meditation shed, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. The evening arrived as hangovers from bad decisions do, slowly and accompanied by palpitations. My phone rang, an unknown number. I answered without speaking the name. An annoyingly calm voice answered, "Do you want to resolve this as an adult, or would you rather get into a legal war that will wear everyone down?" It was her, the woman, with the tone of someone who had already rehearsed the conversation in front of the mirror. "It depends. Do you want to give back what's mine, or continue to profit from other people's land? I replied, with the patience of a drunken Tibetan monk. The call lasted 2 minutes, long enough for her to try to negotiate an amicable agreement and suggest that I could donate the land as a contribution to the community. That sentence made me laugh so loudly that my neighbor looked out the window. Basically, the contribution was a desperate attempt to keep the scheme going, because she knew that if it came to light, she would not only lose her position as mini-dictator of the condominium, but would also face a revolt from residents furious at having paid unnecessarily for years. I hung up with a simple warning. If in 48 hours you don't have a written retraction and the complete removal of the HOA structure from my land, I'll take legal action and go all the way. She didn't reply, which for me was answer enough. 2 days later, I woke up to a truck parked in front of the headquarters. Uniformed men were dismantling awnings, tearing down signs and winding up wires. One of them was wearing a T-shirt that read, "Quick and discreet changes." The kind of irony that life loves to rub in our faces. I watched it all from the balcony, with my coffee in hand and the old bench in the same place as always. With each piece of wall removed, the feeling was one of catharsis. Not just because they were dismantling a structure built on a lie, but because each hammering was a symbolic "shut up" at the endless meetings where this woman imposed rules on the length of curtains, the type of plant allowed, and the exact shade of gray acceptable for painting the sidewalks. Of course, she wasn't going to disappear so easily. The new letter I received, now signed by her and a lawyer, tried to make it sound like the removal of the headquarters was a strategic decision by the community to decentralize services. It was such a ridiculous juggling of words that I almost felt sorry for the lawyer who had to write it. Only now the tables had turned, and the story was far from over. After the association's makeshift headquarters had been dismantled, and the ground had become nothing more than an empty patch of uneven grass with tire tracks and the remains of cheap inauguration tape, it seemed that the woman's empire had really begun to crumble. But what no one there expected, not me, nor the neighbors who were watching everything with binoculars through their windows, was that she was going to make one last desperate move that was more like a scene from a Mexican soap opera mixed with a documentary about corruption in a rural town hall. The following week, she showed up with a plastic smile on her face, handing out colorful flyers printed on thick paper, like an influencer's wedding invitation. The HOA's new idea? The creation of a community executive board with additional authority over all the land in the neighborhood, including that which, according to her, directly interferes with the aesthetic and moral experience of the community. In other words, she wanted to set up a parallel organization to the HOA, with new names, new positions, but the same absolute control, a kind of gourmet dictatorship, only with meetings scheduled by email and minutes signed in gold pen. The pamphlets made no bones about it. They talked about ecological harmony of space, restoring the natural order between adjoining properties, and even visual synchrony between real estate. It was the kind of thing that sounds nice when you read it quickly, but if you think about it for 2 seconds, you realize that it's just a bunch of drivel written by someone who probably believes that plants communicate via spiritual Wi-Fi. But what made me laugh the most, and tear my hair out at the same time, was seeing that the official address of this new council was exactly the same as the old one. My property. The woman simply pretended that nothing had happened, took a white tent, 2 plastic chairs and a folding table, and reinstalled the command of the universe right there in the middle of my bush, as if it was normal to set up an office in other people's houses just because the weather was nice. It made me lose any trace of civilized patience I had left in my body. And I'm a quiet person, the kind of person who sees a queue at the market and thinks, okay, there must be people in more of a hurry than me. But there was no more room to be patient. It was time to put an end to this bullshit once and for all. This time, I filed a formal lawsuit, with everything: a complaint for trespassing, misuse of private space, misappropriation of the physical structure, as well as moral and financial damages. Because yes, in addition to the tent and table, she put up a sign saying public service from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., as if she had a municipal license. She even went so far as to install a security camera that pointed directly at my backyard, claiming that it was necessary to keep an eye on areas that were aesthetically displeasing. At the preliminary hearing, the judge looked at the documents, listened to her arguments, wiped his hand across his forehead with that "why did I choose this career" look, and gave a sigh worthy of a therapist at the end of the day. "Madam, are you aware that you have set up an unauthorized administrative structure on a resident's property without any kind of contract, license, or even verbal permission?" She cracked that stale margarine smile and let out one of the most surreal sentences I've ever heard in my life. "I don't consider it trespassing, Your Honor. I consider it a spontaneous contribution to community order." I froze. The judge froze. I think even the air conditioning in the courtroom stopped for 3 seconds. It was the kind of sentence that brings down Wi-Fi because of the shame it causes in the environment. The hearing lasted less than an hour. The judge didn't even bother to get up from his chair to hand down the preliminary sentence: immediate removal of the structure, payment of a fine for trespassing and misuse of property, and a ban on the reactivation of any administrative body anywhere on my land. On the way home, even with a clear victory, I felt that there was still something strange in the air. The woman hadn't shown up for 3 days. No inspection walk, no notice hanging on the door, not one complaint about the color of the garbage can or the position of the hose in the garden. It was like the silence before a typhoon, and I already knew, when this kind of person disappears, it's because they're working behind the scenes. It was on a cloudy afternoon, while I was mowing the lawn with that noisy, poorly lubricated mower, that I saw a black car pull up in front of the house. One of those sedans that nobody buys for style, only for business reasons. Out stepped a man in a rumpled suit, dark glasses, and a briefcase in his hand. He walked up to me unhurriedly, greeted me with mock formality, and introduced himself as legal advisor to the association's new board. According to him, the woman was now trying to sue the condominium itself, claiming that the lack of institutional space to carry out her duties forced her to occupy neighboring areas. It was like invading your neighbor's house and then saying it was because you didn't have a sofa in your living room. I disguised my laughter, accepted the copy of the notice, and wished her luck. Because if she wanted a fight, then let her have it. I already had a lawyer, evidence, angry neighbors, and patience burned to the last millimeter. And that's how, the following month, everything exploded for good. The lawsuit she tried to file against the condominium turned into a shot in the foot as residents began to band together and expose the phantom fees, the undue charges, the manipulative flyers, and even the falsification of signatures at community meetings that no one remembered attending. That woman became the focus of a city hall investigation, lost her job, which technically she never had, was fined for misuse of funds, and, as icing on the cake, received a court order banning her from coming within 50 meters of my house, or any structure erected on my property. The land? Now it's mine alone, officially recognized by a court ruling. No tent, no sign, no impromptu condominium meeting. And the bank? It's still there, intact, under the lemon tree, with 2 new cushions and a sign nailed to the fence saying, "No unauthorized community leaders." Fine. A cold coffee and a look of eternal contempt. And this time, she didn't even have the courage to look in my direction. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.